This is the Movie Theater Butter Podcast, where we talk about stories made into movies and what was modified for the big screen. As a warning, this episode will discuss the plot of both the movie and its original source material, so be ready for spoilers. I'm your host, Kim Labick, and I hope you enjoy the show. So today's episode will start off with a very serious quote because I could not find a funny one that fit well enough. So genuinely, I found a cool little saying on brainyquotes.com. We love it. And it goes, to be able to look back upon one's past life with satisfaction is to live twice.
Wow.
And that's beautiful. And I think that doesn't just apply to James Bond. I think that can apply to all of us in some way.
Yeah, that's profound. Thank you for sharing that with me. I mean,
yeah,
live well, live without regrets, because they'll stick with you.
No regrets. Not a single one. So today we are going to be talking about the film Past Lives. And you may be asking yourself, Kim, your podcast is all about film adaptations. Why are you talking about Past Lives? I don't think that that's an adaptation. That wasn't a book before. Guess what? Past Lives is loosely semi-based on the writer-director's life and a story from her life. So, in just enough of a way for us to have an excuse to talk about this film, Past Lives is technically an adaptation, an adapted film.
Kim's just trying to cash grab on all this Oscar press going
on
right now.
Of course not.
No, this is good. This is a good film to talk about. Kim wanted... She brought up a couple movies with me, but I felt like this one was the most I felt strongly about, so.
For a little introduction, the voice speaking with me today is multi-talented, cool guy, David Cahill.
Wow. Thank you for the intro, Kim. I really appreciate being here on this podcast.
Yeah, it's long overdue.
It is long overdue.
Hell yeah. So as always, we start off with a favorite quote from the material. So David, do you have a favorite quote that you brought today?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of had like a couple things. I guess like my favorite quote would be it's basically when Nora asks why when she reconnects with is it Hai Sung? Yeah, with Hai Sung, she asks why he reached out to her in the first place, and his response is, "I just wanted to see you one more time."
Ooh.
And I definitely, I mean, that's a killer line, like as, I'm just, if you ruin it as a fellow Chad like I am, I'm like, let's go. This guy, he's making progress. He's definitely going to steal this guy's woman. Obviously, the film is about much more than that. I think that line is good because it really signifies like what is kind of like pushing the whole movie forward, which is the sense of longing, and the whole thing is just about like I was like thinking about how funny it is that like so much of this movie hinges off of them finding each other on Facebook or whatever. It's like you could kind of view everything from that perspective. It's a movie about like what happens when this person you were never gonna ever talk to ever again from your past all of a sudden becomes, oh, he's just right at my fingertips. I could just send him a little message, and so yeah, you could send you up to that guy you knew in third grade who you never thought you were gonna see again, and maybe that's not good, the film doesn't go into that too much. But, maybe, there's good and bad to drawing up the past and putting it like that close, just right at your fingertips.
Yeah, or right out of the gate. That's a great thing to bring up because this film is getting so much praise, and rightfully so. And I loved it. I think most people that watched it loved it for how it's like soft and beautiful and sort of the positive side of nostalgia. But you do see like there's a negative side. And I love that you're bringing up, sometimes you shouldn't always bring them back up, or like, is it going to hurt you more to reflect on this past than it is to just live in the here and now?
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting thing you note, that like people like really enjoy like how like warm and intimate this movie is, which I think is like that there's definitely merit to that. That's definitely something that Celine Song, the director, like hits on. But I would also say like that's an interesting point because like I view the movie like the opposite way. Like I'm almost like too empathetic with, the guy character, like the husband character, that I'm just like, what's going on here? This is kind of scary stuff. this is kind of a nightmare scenario, you know, because, you know, I mean, it's obviously that's just the character that, you know, through the reality of my upbringing, I could probably relate to most. The dude is just some artist in New York. He's like, who's this guy, you know, from 12 years ago? What's he doing in my house right now?
I do like, on that note, you know, when we finally get further along in the film and they all meet up and it's like the three of them. Yes, it's clearly a bit awkward. And yes, like there's moments where it's either said or unsaid that whatever his name is, the husband guy, is like jealous and is like
Right.
scared that this is going to be a classic. You guys had something years ago and now it's rekindled and like I'm going to be pushed away or you're going to run away from me kind of thing.
Right.
But I also love, I don't know, I guess how real and how like polite that whole interaction was. You know, I think if this was like a classic, like a full-on blockbuster type rom-com, it would be more like, I'm going to beat him up. I'm going to win your heart back kind of shit.
Yeah.
Whereas this was very really like, he's jealous and he can kind of explain it, not fully. It's not gonna, you know, he's not gonna bring it out to hurt her or to hurt him, but it does create this awkward tension within the trio.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I definitely feel like that's when things become like it's so funny when you know, Hai Sung just like comments on I'm forgetting the other male character's name, but
It starts with an A and I'm also forgetting it.
I hate to call him just like the white guy, you know, but you know, the husband character when she when the other guy Hai Sung like meets him, he's like, "Oh wow, his Korean's pretty good." You know, like that's so like I love that. That's such a good moment to me. But my overall thoughts would be, you know, and this is just very much my particular opinion, you know, because I think a lot of people really like the politeness of the movie and how, like, you know, it really goes out of its way to, like, not make anyone particularly the enemy, you know. It's, like, just a very, like, light movie about, like, how you kind of, you know, miss someone from your past. And I know, like, someone I was talking to, they were discussing the movie with some older women, and you know, I think my friend, she didn't like the movie as much, and they said like, oh well, you'll understand this much more one day, which to me that is like a terrifying response, because it's like, again, I just can't help but look at it as like, you know, if I was in that position, I would be like very frustrated in what was going on, you know, or at least like, I think like the movie, like where I find fault with it is like, I wish it was able to be like a little more like, maybe honest isn't the best word, but a bit more like daring in how like it approached like the messiness of that situation, you know? Like I felt like it was very nice, and everyone was like kind of like getting along like a little too much, like for my taste, you know? I just feel like
You wanted that fist fight.
it's a very that's a very messy situation, you know. And like I think what like the Oscar winner last year, Everything Everywhere All at Once, like what that got right about like this like intergenerational story of love, you know, was that it like pushed it to this weird extreme. And not every movie should be that, but I felt like that kind of hits more home when it comes to depicting like the messiness of love, you know, and like the loyalty required, you know. And yeah, this film, it I felt like there was like some sort of a disconnect between like what they were trying to say with the script and how it was acted, to where, I don't know, it just felt like obvious that for good or bad, you know, if you're sitting there pining after this guy you used to know, it's like, you know, maybe there's a good chance that there's issues in your current relationship, you know. And like,
Ooh.
yeah, you know, and I felt like I wanted to see more of that, you know. It kind of made it so that, you know, if you go all the way to the end, you know, like her, you know, kind of the feeling I get is that she stays with the boyfriend because like she's too Americanized now. She doesn't want to go back to Korea, you know, or that's kind of like, because it seems like she really likes the dude, you know, like, and she kind of doesn't express that much love for her husband. So the only thing kind of in the way is like, I moved here and I decided to make this my decision and I should stick with that, you know, is kind of like what she like quite literally says, you know. But yeah, those are my thoughts. I'm curious to hear what you think, but yeah.
Yeah. I think you and I are still reading it in the same way, but I think you like you kind of said, are a little bit attaching more to the husband character and how things would feel from that perspective to try and understand the situation, versus I'm going in it, you know, in her shoes.
when I try to be in her shoes, that is what leaves me frustrated. It's like, I kind of like, I either, and I don't want to place too much of like my opinion of what the movie should be on top of it, like I don't want to change what the intention obviously was, but like part of me felt like the ending either should have been like, fuck the husband that I'm slightly dissatisfied with, like I'm gonna do, I'm gonna triumph over these logistical challenges and be with this person who I'm meant to be with. Or it's kind of like, I wish they kind of lingered more in like the tragedy, like the silent tragedy of that, of like, yeah, I'm gonna stay with my husband, and like maybe he is fine, like maybe, it doesn't have to be that he's a bad guy and he's abusive or whatever. Maybe he's just okay, and like there's something like kind of sad about that. I guess when it comes to I wish High Sung was like a little more like fleshed out, or at least, again, I wish the movie pushed itself a little more out of realism, than it does. It feels very comfortable at the moment, but like, the idea of these two people being like meant for each other, they've known each other for all this time. Like, I kind of wish their upbringing was a little more like chance encounter, like they accidentally get swapped up at birth or something and they realize immediately, but like maybe their parents kind of have an interact. Something that feels a little more like
a little more juice.
Yeah, a little more juice to it, rather than it just kind of feels like they just kind of know each other when they're 12 and that's that or what. And so that kind of brings me back to my main point of like, maybe this isn't good, like it's kind of portrayed as being like, oh, this is a sweet thing, but
David
like
Cahill, word for word, just said, fuck the Academy. This is a bad movie. You heard it here first, guys.
You heard it here first. But of course, like, if you want to go there, it's like to be like super critical of it. Like, this is kind of like more of a metatextual thing. If you're looking at it from outside, like what actually happens in the movie, it's like, this is an A24 movie, right?
Mm-hmm. A24.
A2, is that what it is?
Yeah, I think so.
A24. Okay, I'll say it right for all the A24 heads out there. I don't wanna offend that crowd. But I feel like what they can be guilty of is like having movies that have all these signifiers of being like artsy movies without actually following it up with like that content, and
you mean like when the film opens on a long uncut shot, slowly zooming into the subject?
Yeah, when it's like in 4:3. But like It's kind of low key stupid. A24, they love doing that shit. And like they do give opportunities to filmmakers I really like. That has opened a lot of interesting doors for sure. Like I definitely like their output more than a lot of the other studios, I guess. But and this makes sense, is like, A24 is pretty much filling the void that Miramax left. Like the kind of artsier, like indie type of movies, the movies that seem like, oh, we're taking a chance on something, or like I would call them like the corporate indies, because these aren't really independent movies,
It's structured
Yeah.
kind of like what we're talking about. There is sort of a new format for independent or lower budget films.
Yeah.
Whereas previously it was sort of, there's a format for your blockbuster films, for your, AMC releases, but anything else indie is kind of just throw shit at the wall.
Yeah, exactly. It's the only company that's like really supporting them throughout, which kind of makes them not indies, but they are in a way. And so that's, I think an issue that I have with Past Lives is that like they've got all those like indie art house signifiers. Like it looks so good. Like it's shot on like super 35 millimeter or just 35 millimeter, and like the grain is pushed all the way up. It's like pushed a couple stops. So like it looks so good, and it's, again, like Celine Song is good at like giving like good images, good like intimate, like warm images throughout. But like I don't think that like the form of that really matches the content, which is just a much more like basic story, in a very basic way. It's like appealing to the Oscar voters, like Oscar bait is a term that's thrown around. There's movies like that every year, and it's interesting this is the one that stands out, I think partially because of that, partially, you look at a movie like Coda, that won, like I've been saying Past Lives has like a chance at winning, the best picture, and And people, they're like, it's hard to imagine in a year where there's so many other like big, bold visions that are in the best picture race. But people, with quote unquote respectable taste, like they like this because it's a very respectable movie. It's very polite and very nice, and it stays in very nice like aesthetic boundaries that doesn't offend anyone. And so I definitely like wouldn't want to shit on the movie too much, but I think that is kind of how it exists within like the A24 or A24 like architecture of like, let's like look at this cool film movement and grab a couple like surface level details and throw it on this like, it's just kind of like whatever story.
Damn, go off, David, go off.
And so that's what you end up with here. And so I kind of feel like, what I don't like, and this is like the metatextual part, is like when these movies are discussed, like you read articles about like, there's so much talk about how like the exposure it brings to like the ethnic group that it portrays, like that's part of what gives it like, whether this is good or bad, that's part of what makes people think of it in an art house term, is that like you see like foreign people in predominant roles speaking like other subtitled languages on the screen. And like when these films are talked about, like they ultimately, at least in America, like don't seem to really bring much attention to the actual like international cinema communities that like these movies are like taking stylistic elements from. Like they ultimately don't return back to that, and like
Yeah.
if you were to like, because of the reason that it's like one of these American movies that so predominantly features like another like language speaking culture, like you could lump it in with like Parasite, and like I love Parasite, like that's a really awesome movie. But if I was to like give it a critique, or at least like give, the criticism of it a critique, it's very Western movie. It's like, it's taking like some things that are like, of like their specific culture, but really putting it through a Western framework. Like one of Bong Joon-ho's biggest inspirations is Hitchcock.
On the topic of what you're talking about, I want to ask you a question.
Okay.
Kind of on the topic of, I think, what we're experiencing now in the industry, which is just, I don't even want to spoil it. Let me just ask you the question. Have you seen American Fiction?
I have not seen American Fiction. I know vaguely what it's about.
Okay.
But go ahead.
I think you should see American Fiction. And honestly, maybe we can record another episode about that.
Totally.
because
I'm down.
Because it's also an adaptation.
Hell yeah.
And it's on my list to have an episode about. But I will say, without giving any spoilers and without super diving into it, it discusses sort of how entertainment industries particularly are geared towards like one or two types of stories by
right.
Anybody who's not like a white straight man has like one or two types of stories that they can pitch and that they can get out there, kind of thing. And yeah, again, I won't be spoilery, but it sort of discusses that and discusses how that is both positive and negative, and it has a really great theme to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's, and that's definitely something that we're dealing with now, is we're dealing with like...
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, like, that was another thought I had about the movie that's, like, a little weird as well, and maybe you kind of could blame the industry more than you can blame Celine Song, I don't know. But, like, the idea of, like, someone who came to a new country in a relatively privileged, like, manner, like, using the immigrant story in a very, like, surface-level way just to, like, succeed in their own personal ventures is like, it's suspicious to me, and that's definitely an issue. Like, I feel like I wanted to, come across as like more objective about this movie, because I do recognize like why people enjoy it, like there are like nice things about it, but I think I'm just like convincing myself more and more the more I talk about it, like that this is just like a stupid like hollow movie, and A24 are like colonizers of cinematic art. It's like, even they do it within like, and I guess this would be legally their right or whatever, but they do it even with filmmakers that they support. They'll have someone like Ari Aster comes out with Hereditary, and they make like how many movies that are just kind of aping the style of that afterwards. Like that's just kind of like the thing that they love to do the most. And this movie definitely like falls under that category. I just want to know, like, how is this like one of the best movies of the year? Like, I don't, especially in the year when like usually the like at least in my opinion, the Best Picture nominees are mostly like bogus. Like it's always like a lot of like Oscar bait movies, maybe a couple that you like yourself. This movie or this year's actually pretty good. Like I actually really like a lot of the movies that came out last year. I felt weird about it in the middle of the year, but by the end of the year, you kind of look back, you're like, damn, there were actually a lot of interesting movies that came out of the studio system, and a lot of them are nominated, you know?
David, you know what movie came out in the year 2023 and was not nominated for absolutely anything?
What?
And I will be mad about this forever. Cocaine Bear. Nothing.
Cocaine
It got
Bear,
nothing.
nothing. It got It should have gotten like best use of Chat GPT award. You know, maybe.
I loved that movie. I will say you know what? I would love to do an episode about that one too. But the only thing
Yeah.
I'll say about it right now is my big critique on Cocaine Bear was that it didn't go crazy enough. There were points that it was definitely getting there, and it kind of reined itself back in. And I was like, no, go crazy. Make that Cocaine Bear like create a rocket ship and shoot himself to the moon. I will love it.
Totally. No, that's definitely like, you know, when you have a movie like that, you got to go all the way. You know, if the issue with a lot of movies too is they're not willing to be like disrespectable enough, you know, like that movie should have gotten like a little grosser. It should have been like a little meaner. It's like, it's about Coke, like that's a harsh vibe. I would have loved to see more cokey vibes than just like everything's crazy,
vibes.
bro.
Yeah, agreed. But back to Past Lives to kind of, you know, rein us back into that a little bit.
Yeah.
One thing I want to say, in the format that I watched this movie, there were no English subtitles for the Korean language parts. Did you have English subtitles?
Oh, you know what? You're right. I don't think I did. Yeah, they didn't tell you what they were actually saying.
Yeah, and I cheated a little bit. I opened Google Translate sometimes just to kind of like get the gist of what was happening. I think you could still mostly understand it, like at least the vibes of what was happening in the discussion without knowing the specifics. But I was like, well, I want to follow this movie and I want to talk about it. And so I need to know a little bit more. And on one hand, I don't know. On one hand, I want to commend that choice because I understand, or at least I think I understand sort of what the filmmaker is going for. You know, she's trying to be like, you are not fully in this world if you don't understand both English and Korean. So you can't fully, you know, you can't fully get it. You can't fully be there. And that's part of the point, is that you're like split between these two lives, this like past life and your present. And cool, great. And I do love that. I do love that as like an aspect of the storytelling and what you're trying to get at. But I also am just like a really selfish native English speaker. And I don't know, it's hard for me to watch a film that most of it is in a different language and there's like no help.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think you're right about seemingly what the purpose of that is, and that honestly like is like offensive to the audience in a way of it being like, oh well, this is just like a Korean story, and if you don't speak the language, like you're probably only getting half of it. It's like, that's so rude. Like, do not talk down to me like that, you know. And
to be fair, we've been doing that. I mean, the English speaking community has been doing that in the reverse for kind of ever.
Oh, sure.
So
you mean like not yeah, I mean, because there are like, sometimes you watch a foreign movie, it'll be like a French movie, and someone will say something in English and it's not subtitled, and you're like, oh, I like, do they just know it? Like, what's
Oh, actually, let me get on that for a second, because speaking of films that are in at least more than one language, there are 2 films nominated for Best Picture this year that use another language besides English. And the other one would be Anatomy of a Fall. I'm not sure if you've seen that one yet.
And Killers of the Flower Moon.
And 3. I haven't seen Killers of the Flower Moon. Okay. So, because it's super long and it's going to take me a second to watch that one.
I was going to say Killers of the Flower Moon is basically what like Celine Song is doing to her community. You know, it's...
Damn. Ouch. Ouch. That's hard hitting. But yeah, as far as, you know, for the Anatomy of a Fall as well, I think that's really cool, because in both Anatomy of a Fall and in this film, there is a central unique purpose and use of different langues that I think is great. And we don't see that enough in, you know, modern American cinema. We don't get that nearly as much as we should. You're saying you haven't seen Anatomy of a Fall?
I have not seen Anatomy of a Fall.
Okay, so I can't spoil it all then. this is not a spoiler, but I will just say the French of it all is, of course, an important part, just
Yeah.
naturally. And
Yeah.
then there's a specific moment where the misunderstanding of French is significant,
Yeah. Yeah,
which is fun.
some movies I really like that element. You know, I mean like a recent movie that does that is, I don't know if you saw Triple R.
Ooh, not yet.
But
R R
like
R.
yeah, R there's a good play of like a language barrier there that I really appreciate. That you know, some movies like they delve into that, some movies they kind of gloss over that. In this movie, like I feel like if it was more in the husband's perspective, they might like play up kind of the misunderstanding, you know. And I part of me, like, again, like I think I would have liked to see more about that, because you know, good or bad, like definitely a good part of the movie is her understandably, the main character having this anxiety about like, oh, here's this guy who came up from my past, and I realize how much we have in common, especially because of our shared like birthplace and our shared like community and all of that, you know, versus, you know, now she's like married to some, you know, dude who grew up in a completely different place from her, you know, who looks very different from her in a very superficial way, you know. And I think that's like super fucking uncomfortable to like address, but I do feel like that is kind of at play here. And yeah, that's again like my critique is like, yeah, it's like, maybe again, I don't want to make the movie what it wasn't ever supposed to be, but I think that would have been a good place to go through. It's like, look, like I love you, but every once in a while I'm gonna be a little nervous, because it's like, yeah, you know, you represent something that's very far from home.
So you're saying basically, in if this story was the story of Jay Gatsby, the Great Gatsby, you basically are Tom Buchanan. And you're like, no, fuck Gatsby. I don't like this. Get out of my life. Go away with your fancy parties and your mysterious past.
Yeah, but I mean, I like this. Like, I don't think the story should have been in his perspective. Like, I like the perspective it's in. You know, that's just me kind of, you know, hypothesizing what a different movie could be. I don't know. I do love the first scene is really funny, and again, like this kind of relates to what I was just saying. You know, the first scene hints at like this the worry about what other people view you as. And I do think that relates as well, as like,
Yeah.
you know, like the people kind of initially assume that like either Hai Sung and our main character are boyfriend and girlfriend, or they're siblings. They have no like assumptions really about like the husband. There's that's just a white guy there, you know. So like, I wish that this was commented on more. But I at least appreciated the opening scene where they're just like, you know, this random couple is like, oh, who are they to each other in a bar? You know, why are they here together? And they just like come to the conclusion, like, are they tourists and that's their guide? Like,
You know what's interesting is that's sort of the strongest tie between the film and its inspiration in the director's life. So
okay,
I don't know if you've looked it up, but the gist is that that moment, that like beginning moment and the scene at the bar is the closest to sort of the inspiration for the film itself. And it's still not
yeah,
word for word, but sort of the idea was that the filmmaker was having a moment like that in her life where she was translating between two friends that didn't speak the same language. And she felt kind of, you know, not quite here, not quite there because of it.
yeah,
And she later on was thinking to herself, oh, I'm sure that somebody was watching and trying to like people watch and kind of figure out what relation I had to this person and what relation I
yeah,
had to this person. So she kind of took, kind of like what you're talking about, she took like what she thought people were thinking of her and made that the scene in the film, which is
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, I think that's like a great conceit for a film, and that's like a very interesting place to start. But and yeah, so I'm guessing that that's like a thread that is like running through the film. But I again, like I wish it was a little more obvious, like later in the movie, that that's actually like, you know, again, it's she's worried because there's an obvious like there's a racial difference between them, you know, and she doesn't, and that what comes with that is also cultural things, and she feels stuck in the middle of that. I don't know. It was, you know, it was an okay movie. It's just like,
You definitely, you think and I don't want to put words into your mouth, but
For sure.
it sounds like a lot of what you've been saying about at least your view of the film is, yeah, it's good, it's a good story, but it overall feels kind of hollow, and like it's not letting itself explore some of the harder aspects of that and some of just like the grungier moments, and it just kind of stays on almost like one emotional level the whole time.
Yeah, it's very samey throughout, and like the pacing can feel a little slow for that reason. Like, I would argue that a film that's like very similar, but I like maybe a little more, was like, I don't know if you saw The Farewell that came out in 2019. No. I believe that was also A24. But yeah, it's like, commenting very much so on like, Lulu Wang has Awkwafina play a character kind of like her. It's kind of autobiographical, and she's like an Americanized like or westernized daughter of this like Chinese immigrant family, and just like it plays with like the differences between them in a little more of like an obvious but like more like funny like way. I appreciate that, because at least like that's what I do like about like if you're going to showcase another group of people, a group that might be like foreign to America, it's nice to get like a good sense of who they are and what they come from, but like yeah, I don't know, I guess in this movie there also was, it felt I just like a movie to commit to what it's trying to say, or to, I like movies that make like very strong proclamations, and even if they're wrong, or if they're slightly wrong, there's like some validity that could be found, and at least you feel like a sense of perspective, like that's what I want to see is, I'm really looking at this to see like, what does Celine Song think? And I feel like she's holding back a little bit.
Do you have the same criticism about Oppenheimer? Because that's my biggest criticism about Oppenheimer, is that it shies away from really definitively saying what he did was wrong and that is bad. I felt like it tended to make it a bit more ambiguous of this poor genius man who just happened to kill 250,000 people.
I feel like what they it's hard, that's a complicated movie. It's hard, but what I will say they do make the point of is that it's not for good. At least what I'm thinking of is the moment where like Benny Safdie's character says, "Until they build a bigger bomb."
Oh yeah.
And to me, I think that like at least makes the point of being like, if you think you solved a problem, you solved it for now, and it's not really solving the bigger issue at play here. And that's like I mean, that movie is so great. Like Chris Nolan has kind of said as much in its I think about that in relation to all of this AI stuff that happens these days, where, everyone puts all this emphasis on technology and how strong or how forceful a technology can be. But ultimately, like, you cannot forget the fact that, like, technology acts a certain way because people designed it to. And people need it. People need to be held accountable.
I won't get into this because it would spoil a project that I myself am working on, but I have a project that relates to how AI is a product of its creation, which I think, totally. I mean, that's not anything new to say, but it's just, there's a project specifically towards that I'm working on. And yeah, I completely agree. It deserves emphasis. It deserves to be one of the conversations at the forefront of our culture right now, because AI itself is at the forefront of our culture. And not to say that I think some of these things that are called AI are just beefier algorithms. Like, it kind of feels like almost everything is like, hey, come get this Zoom AI. And it's just like, you just improved your camera quality a little bit or something like that. Not specifically that, but
also just like another thing, like if you're going to talk about AI is, there's always the worry of like AI influencing the way people write scripts, but people are already choosing what scripts to write based off of what algorithms tell them to.
And that's part of the problem. That's part of the overall problem, like what you're talking about, where it only allows for certain people to have like only minor stories and like, oh, you can only push so far with this kind of discussion.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, okay, we're on a podcast right now about film adaptations. One of the main problems in our industry is that it feels like almost everything is just an adaptation or a sequel. And that is a huge problem in some ways. And I will say there's also a benefit to sharing stories again and again throughout generations, because they're important stories thematically that will never change and that haven't changed yet.
Civil War, Avengers.
Like Civil War, Avengers, exactly. Every single Spider-Man movie that could possibly exist.
The Prisoner of Azkaban is a story as old as time.
Oh God,
No,
and we're getting a whole
hate
nother
to
Harry Potter.
Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah, no, it's interesting. Like to view this as like an adaptation. It definitely I would say, maybe it's fair, maybe it's not, but you might be able to critique. If my critique is like, I feel like these characters could have been a little more nuanced, or they could have been a little harsher, or at least there could have been some more rough edges that were shown to make it feel at least slightly more realistic. That would kind of fall in line with the fact that this was someone's story who was writing it. She's not looking at anyone. She's trying to be fair, make everyone seem to be out, like they have like understandable wants and needs here, but like that's just not like the reality of things, and it's like, I don't know, you could have actually like, people make movies, sometimes,
They do.
you make it, people make movies, if you didn't know.
Sometimes.
Sometimes people make decisions because like the distributor wants you to do something. Sometimes the producer wants you to do something. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they are telling you to do something because they know it will impress the Academy, or it will, do the opposite of that. However, like, people, I understandably in that process, writers and directors, they're thinking about appeasing these people because these are the people who get their movies made. But ultimately, like, as the writer director, you're the one left holding the bag when you come up with a movie that sucks.
I love that this whole conversation, I genuinely do. I love that this whole conversation has kind of turned into a rant about, like, for lack of a better word, the gentrification of A24 films.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to put it. And, my bad. I'm just out here rambling like an old man on his porch.
But you're right. I think that's a problem. I think that can be so strongly associated with this film because it's at the forefront right now. And because, again, it is nominated for Best Picture. But you can say that about, I think sort of the past year-ish of A24 films, because again, they kind of represent indie films in a way.
Yeah.
But they've kind of slacked. There was that movie with Nicolas Cage that came out that I thought was going to be cool and crazy. And at least for me, it just really missed the mark.
Yeah. I didn't see that one. It looked interesting, but that's disappointing to hear. I'm not like too surprised altogether. Yeah, I mean, it's like you could go like conspiracy mode. I mean, well, you just relate it to like the overall like, outlook of art in America and how like the conversation around it, especially if you're talking about like cinema, like that's something I know a lot about, at least the daily discourse online. And, it's always seems like a battle between like people who have some modicum of respect for it and like people who just want to assault it in every way, and usually by saying like, oh, it's pretentious, or which is obviously like insane, that like watching a movie from another country is a pretentious thing to do. I think that's a nice woke thing to do, a nice like worldly way to like expose yourself to new ideas and new ways of living, but
yeah,
the people who run these things, they don't want you to see good movies. They don't want you to
It's like we're stuck in a little bit of a time loop, right? Because the business that is allowing films to be distributed, sort of numbers and the data that these people are working off of to push anything forward, they're working on the past. So they're saying, oh, this worked last year. Audiences loved this thing last year. Therefore, and not even that. Let me take it back. Because the reality is they're working on like 5 or 10-year-old data.
Yeah.
They're being
totally.
like, hey, 5 years ago, we had a really good film called The Avengers. So what we need to do is we need to make 50 different films just like that because that's what people want. And the reality is culture changes constantly. The kind of films that I think people want to see nowadays are so different than even a year ago, even 2 years ago, especially given how, world events have transformed everyone. And not even to, and it's also, that's what's sort of slowing down a lot of social progress, I feel, is because we're working on these like older data sets again. It's like you're keeping us in the 5, 10, 20 years ago because that's all you know to work off of. When the reality is we are here and now and we're trying to push forward. Why don't you just let new things happen to see where they go?
They're too scared to do new things, and I partially can't blame them because there is an issue of people like audiences not being tolerant of like bad characters. I think there's like a very obvious issue where people are conflating what is it? It's like representation versus it's like just because the main character is bad doesn't mean we think it's good what he's doing. And there's a lot of people online nowadays who can't separate the nuances of that. And that is why these like producers are like nervous as fuck. Like this is why like all these very polite like nice movies with no rough edges are made, because there is a group of people who will criticize no matter what. It's like, The Wolf of Wall Street is kind of like a bad example to give maybe because it is flaunting this bad behavior so aggressively. But like, and that is also like a little more like of a complex movie, but like, people had like where they're rioting in some minimal way about it when it came out. And it's like, look, like it's about how this guy is a bad guy. Like it's not like where the filmmakers thought like, oh, here's this upstanding citizen we're gonna make a movie about. It's like it's about him being the biggest piece of shit ever, and like people still enjoying him because he's charismatic.
Yeah, okay. On that note, I love this discussion because it's tough because we do need to balance having more of those stories and having those discussions. But yes, like we see instances where, Joker is not meant to make you like the character of the Joker. It's made for you to understand where it came from and how it, and how this character exists in society. But you're not supposed to be like, oh yeah, he's so cool. He's so quirky. I am him. And then go crazy, and I think we're slowly getting better about that. I think this discussion began with specifically Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. And Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, as much as I love it, it did not do it right. And we know that. But we've been slowly but surely learning since then. But like you're saying, it's still very risky. I mean, when you have any character as your main character, they are inevitably the protagonist. You are therefore rooting for them. Even if it's, I won't say this. There is a film that I watched years ago about a very bad human being, and I don't want to talk about it. It's about a very bad human being, and the story itself was quirky and funky, and it was meant to, really say some things and really get you to start thinking, not in a way that ever excused that bad person, but in a way that, opened your mind to some other things.
Right. And that is uncomfortable. I do get why sometimes people don't like it.
Yeah, like it's hard for me to even talk about because, I can clearly say like this character is a bad person and what they are doing and what they think is not good. But discussing that needs to happen because that's how we start to understand it more. That's how we start to understand people more. You should be able to... I don't really know what I'm trying to say with this. I think
you should, you're exactly right. Like you should just be able to like say what you want to say. You should be able to portray whatever character you want to portray. And like, like Scorsese, throughout his career has just taken all this shit because he wants to make these movies about these absolutely awful human beings. There are people who, I guess in the general sense seem awful. Like there's a story about him. They were about to cancel the green light for Raging Bull, and they just said, the producers just said, like, well, just tell us, like, why do you want to make a movie about a cockroach? And De Niro just said, like, I don't think he's a cockroach. And they were just like, okay. And then they just, for whatever reason, let him complete the movie. But, like, people don't understand, like, that's where the juice is, though. It's like, why tell a movie about, like, a super nice guy who never does anything wrong?
Yeah. Well, and just... naturally storytelling, and especially the way it is with film, but storytelling in general is like there's a lesson. There is something, your character grows. Sometimes that doesn't mean they grow in the right direction, but there is growth, there is change. And so for that change to occur, your character has to start off one way and end off a different way. I mean, that sounds so stupid to say because we all know that, but that's part of any story ever. So it's
people
like
miss it,
we
though.
Need stories of like you start a bad guy and become a good guy, or you start a good guy and become a bad guy, or whatever it is. But the change is what's important, and to learn from that. And yeah, I think we're ending up in a space where stories specifically about like difficult, characters / again, quote unquote bad guys, we're getting more of that, and we're getting to a better place with how audiences receive that and actually learn from that. I think The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is a good example personally. But another example that's like way out of left field that I want to talk about really quickly, going back to the French of it all. Did you know that the French basically have their own James Bond?
I don't think I'm aware of that. No, that would make sense.
Yeah, the French basically have their own James Bond, and that's a whole nother thing. It's a very fun.
Is it newer? Or it's not like because I know there's like
2000s.
Okay.
There were older ones, but when they rebooted them in the 2000s, what they did was they changed it so that this main character, and his name is, well, his title is OSS 117. So he's like 117 instead of 007.
Nice.
But his whole shtick is like he is, in a bumbling sense, very like racist and sexist and terrible and like very traditional old style
French stuff.
Yeah, like very traditional French guy kind of thing. The bad side of traditional French guy. But that's kind of the whole shtick, is that he gets into trouble because of this, and he slowly kind of a little bit learns to be a better person. Yeah, and it was funny. I was speaking with a friend of mine about these films the other day, and when I watched these films, there's some funny moments, and there were so many moments that I was like, oh, this is bad. Like, they're trying to be satire, but the way that I was reading it, just as an audience member, was, oh no, it feels like they're almost like idolizing this shitty character. But then I spoke with, one of my friends who literally is French, speaks French, lives in France. He had more of the mindset of understanding the satire a bit more. Yeah. So part of it is also kind of like what we're talking about, again, with bad guy characters, so to speak. Part of it is also just a cultural difference. I think the US audience is slower to get there to really be ready for it, but we're like on the edge.
Yeah. No, yeah, the French will have a movie about like some like, mobster rapist who like smokes cigars all the time, and they'll be like, well, this is at least the character I can relate to. No.
I hope not.
Yeah, that's definitely you could get lost in the bit for sure. There's some people who will say they're making a movie like denouncing someone, when low-key you could tell they like him a little much. And that, like, I think that's also fair. Like, a movie maybe we'll talk about, Ferrari, is a movie that it is critical of his main character, but you could tell the main character is just like the director. Like, he kind of likes him too, and that's part of the sauce.
Also, being at this stage in life that you and I both are, where we can recognize that, is really fucking cool, and is, stories have brought us here in the way that like now we can recognize, like, say there's that person who you just met and like you're talking about movies, and they do talk about how much they love the Joker. And I think there's different ways that conversation can go, and either way it goes, it tells you a lot about that person. If they talk about the Joker and they're like, yes, cinematography was great, like Joaquin Phoenix crushed it, like I love that movie, it was really well done, yada yada yada, cool, awesome. But if you get that person who's like, yeah, and I cosplay as the Joker like every single year, and like my girlfriend was crazy, my last girlfriend that I had was so crazy, and you like get all these notes in your head where you're like, oh, if that's how you read the film, I know a lot more about you now.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, it's like, what was like, I feel like there's an old classic quote about books, which I think applies to movies, that like, there's as many books as there are readers. Like, every person who reads something is going to read it in a different light. If you cosplay as the Joker, you need to be put on a watch list. And if not, straight up just sent to jail. Because that's like the worst sign ever. There's bad stuff going on there. But yeah, no, I do think, there's some people like things for different reasons. But I also think what goes into like people being offended and not wanting to see bad characters is, people who, let's say, didn't like Joker, they're not even worried about how it affects them. A lot of them are worried about people viewing it and getting the wrong idea. They say, oh, well, I know that Joker is just a stupid movie, but I'm worried about this group of people who are going to watch it and take it seriously and actually want to act in some similar ways. And that's like a huge issue with just all of that, is people thinking that like other people aren't smart enough to like decipher what they have deciphered out of a movie. It's like, no, like maybe everyone who's watching it kind of understands he's just a comic book character, because people were saying that audiences were going to be like assaulted when that movie came out. And obviously that
A
didn't
lot of that
happen.
fear comes from, I'm sure you know, a lot of that fear
Right.
comes from two distinct moments in history. One where there was an actual shooting at The Dark Knight Rises at a
Right.
theater, and the other earlier where during one of the mass shootings, I think it actually was Columbine, where they like quoted something from a Batman. So,
Yeah.
and I don't want to say this as like Batman causes a school shooting. No, obviously not. This is a huge discussion we could get into, and I kind of love that we've just totally rerouted to talking about like industry stuff and stories. But no, like Batman doesn't cause school shootings,
Right.
But unfortunately, in this specific instance, there's just been like 2 or 3 things related to it that now there's all this like heaviness behind Batman stories that people are scared about.
Yeah, you know what? I will concede. I do think it's probably a good idea for people to be cautious around Joker fans. That's probably wise. I think if anything, they're probably on the right side of history. The Joker fans are not the ones we should be taking our view off of. We need to keep a close eye on those
Keep
goons.
both eyes open.
Keep both eyes peeled when you see the people walking on the Joker screening. But I think you had a question for the end of this that you were thinking of.
I do. I have a great question for you, David. It is time for a pop quiz. Get it? Pop, like popcorn, peanut butter. It all makes sense.
That was good.
So,
was that Dangerfield? Did he say that first?
Was it? Probably. So, Past Lives is the only second Before I even get into this, again, I love how we've just gone totally off the rails of talking about the film. But I think we kind of hit a couple of the important thematic moments anyways.
Yeah.
Past Lives is only the second film directed by an Asian woman to be nominated for Best Picture. My question for you, David Cahill, in what year was the first?
You said it was an Asian woman nominated for, did you say Best Director?
Best Picture.
Best Picture. What was what was the first? It wouldn't have been Everything Everywhere All at Once? Or you said no, stop. That's not my final answer. You said woman, so it wouldn't be Everything Everywhere All at Once. I'm trying to think of it would be Chloe Zhao for Nomadland.
Yes, correct. In 2020, Chloe Zhao was nominated for Best Picture for Nomadland.
Good for her. I hope her and her billionaire parents are happy about that.
Nomadland, I still haven't seen. It is, dare I say, on my list, which like every film ever made is on my list.
Yeah.
So, well, nicely done. You got that. I'm actually super surprised. So really well done on that.
Hell yeah.
And we're going to wrap this up with the last thing we do in episodes here is we talk about how we think this film is best watched.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go first because I know you've got a hot take and I'm ready to hear it. But I think this film is best watched. And this is going to sound weird, but I think this film is best watched in like a Netflix party or like one of those party things where you're watching it on your laptop at home, cozy in your bed, and a friend or a romantic partner or whatever is watching it in their laptop, somewhere else.
Sure.
Because I think it connects to, I really loved how they how they displayed the kind of internet romance-ish, relationship-ish. I thought that was really cool. So I think the best way to watch this film would be like that. So you can be comfy, the other person can be comfy. All you got to do is have a good internet connection.
There you go. No, I mean, that sounds very nice. I was going to say, like, this might be best viewed with a blindfold.
Oh my God.
Enough ketamine to sedate Manhattan. No.
Noise canceling headphones.
No, you know what? Like, I definitely would have liked it more if I watched it on a plane.
Good plane movie.
Yeah, I think your standards are low. There's something about the pressure. There's something about the height. Things just hit a little harder in that environment because you also know you're just so close to death. If literally anything, if a bird was to hit your plane, so I think that's probably. I think middle seat on a 12-hour international flight.
Damn. On your way to Seoul. Korea.
On your way to Seoul, exactly. On your way to have your own past life encounter.
Well, it sounds like that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to Movie Theater Butter, a Till Kim Productions podcast, edited by Kevin Matthew Keeling of Take the World. If you have a free moment, we'd really appreciate if you like or follow the podcast from wherever you're listening. It'll really help us grow our audience and be able to continue making episodes for you guys. You can also follow us on Instagram for monthly episode schedules, extra content, and even surprise video episodes. All right, I'm done. See you next episode.